Welcome to another big train tour at the Colorado Railroad Museum. This month we'll be doing something different. We'll be following Rio Grande Southern Steam Locomotive No. 20 as it heads off-site to the Cumbres Toltec Scenic Railroad for a series of historic excursions in late summer and early fall 2021. Hi, I'm Paul Hammond, Executive Director of the Colorado Railroad Museum. Locomotive No. 20's journey was an historic one for the Colorado Railroad Museum. This was the first time a steam locomotive from the museum had journeyed off-site to operate on another railroad. Come join me now as we follow No. 20's historic journey from start to finish. The Cumbres Toltec Scenic Railroad had been planning a big 50th anniversary celebration for several years under the leadership of General Manager John Bush. Unfortunately, the festivities had to be delayed from 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the meantime, John had retired and others would carry out the plans already in place. But as 2021 began, the celebration was back on and the excitement began to build. The Cumbres Toltec today operates over a 64-mile portion of the former Denver and Rio Grande Western between Antonito, Colorado and Chama, New Mexico. Featuring spectacular scenery, a steep 4% grade between Chama and 10,000-foot Cumbres Pass, along with stunning displays of color in the fall. The railroad today is considered by many as one of North America's best scenic railroad journeys. The Cumbres Toltec was originally constructed in 1880 and 1881 as part of the Rio Grande's narrow-gauge San Juan extension, which served the silver mining district of the San Juan Mountains in southwestern Colorado. Like all of the Denver and Rio Grande system at the time, it was built to a gauge of 3 feet between the rails instead of the more common 4 feet 8 1/2 inches that became standard in the United States. Silver mining in the U.S. experienced a boom in the 1880s due to the nation's currency policies at the time. However, with the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act in 1893 and its devastating effect on the silver mining industry, the San Juan extension went into a period of decline. In the decades that followed, the railroad was mostly stagnant, with its last major upgrades in equipment and infrastructure made in the 1920s. A post-World War II natural gas boom brought a brief period of prosperity to the line, but operations dwindled to a trickle in the 1960s. Finally, in 1969, the Interstate Commerce Commission granted the Rio Grande's request to abandon its remaining narrow-gauge mainline trackage, thereby ending the last use of steam locomotives in general freight service in the United States. Most of the abandoned track was dismantled soon after the ICC's decision, but through the combined efforts of an energetic and resourceful group of railway preservationists and local civic interests, the most scenic portion of the line was saved. In 1970, the states of Colorado and New Mexico jointly purchased the track and line-side structures from Antonito to Chama, along with locomotives and railroad cars. The railroad began hauling tourists the very next year. Known as the Victorian Iron Horse Roundup, the Cumbres Toltec's postponed celebration event finally took place in August 2021. To commemorate the Scenic Railroad's 50th anniversary, 4 19th century locomotives were planned to be under steam simultaneously, along with the railroad's regularly operating stable of steam locomotives, of course. As it turned out, though, with No. 20 on hand, even more history was made with the addition of yet another 19th century locomotive to the kickoff event. The Victorian Iron Horse Roundup launched with a demonstration day in Antonito to begin with, followed by the 4 originally planned historic steam locomotives from Colorado and Nevada, pulling trains of historic passenger and freight cars across the railroad for a week. So what did Rio Grande Southern No. 20 have to do with all this? Well, it turned out there was interest in having the locomotive journey to the Cumbres Toltec to pull a couple of special photo charter trains around the same time frame as the Roundup event. The leadership of Trains magazine, the Cumbres Toltec Scenic Railroad, and the Colorado Railroad Museum worked through the details and crafted a loan agreement to make this possible starting in early 2021. A unique twist arose around that same time. Locomotive No. 20's hometown of Cripple Creek, led by the Cripple Creek District Museum and supported by a number of local businesses, requested the locomotive make a side trip to the town on its way south to Antonito. Another agreement was drafted, and plans continued to move forward for the locomotive's historic journey starting in August 2021. The museum's roundhouse crews, under the leadership of Curator of Equipment and Rolling Stock Jeff Taylor, spent significant time going over the locomotive mechanically. The goal was to ensure that there were no surprises while the locomotive was on the road. And given that it had only been restored to operation a year earlier, it didn't have a lot of running time yet under its belt. The day before the actual move, loading of No. 20 and its tender onto separate trailers was undertaken at the Colorado Railroad Museum. Early the morning of August 12th, No. 20 began its travels. Only the locomotive would travel to Cripple Creek, with the tender joining it in Antonito a few days later. To get to Cripple Creek, the tractor-trailer would follow U.S. Highway 285 to Hartselle, then head on to Cripple Creek via the back way, ending up on Teller County Route 1. The townsfolk of Cripple Creek loved having Locomotive No. 20 on display for a short couple of days, in conjunction with Cripple Creek's annual Donkey Derby Days. It had been well over 100 years since the locomotive had last seen this famed gold mining town, and it made quite an impression. Steam and smoke effects were graciously provided by Angel Light Pyrotechnics, and paid and volunteer staff from the museum were on hand in Cripple Creek the entire time to share the locomotive's history and answer questions. The 2 days went fast. Early on Sunday morning, August 15th, a truck tractor showed up in Cripple Creek, and soon No. 20 was back on the road. As it headed out of Cripple Creek, everyone involved hoped that this might not be the last time. But even more adventure lay ahead, and soon the 1899 locomotive was being unloaded in Antonito. Its tender showed up a few days later, and then the real work, and fun, was about to get started. The Iron Horse Roundup featured two 1875 steam locomotives from Nevada, the Eureka and the Glenbrook, joined by the C&TS's own recently restored 1883 10-wheeler, Denver and Rio Grande No. 168, along with Denver and Rio Grande Western No. 315, disguised as Denver and Rio Grande 425. Also participating in the activities was 1903 vintage Rio Grande Mudhead No. 463, disguised as Rio Grande Southern 455. The big day in Antonito dawned with Rio Grande Southern 20 as a special guest, and then the chance to take the locomotive out of the yard for test runs. Later on, No. 20 was a welcome addition to a special night photo lineup alongside the Roundup's originally announced stars. The assembled steam locomotives, not including No. 20, went on to delight photographers for the balance of the festival. Sometimes in tandem, other times separately, they pulled historic consists of passenger and freight cars, creating living images that had not been seen for 140 years. After the official end of the Victorian Iron Horse Festival, Rio Grande Southern No. 20 was steamed up to pull a series of additional special trips on the rails of the Cumbres Toltec in late August, late September, and early October. Locomotive No. 20's final excursion was a very special two-day adventure, hosted exclusively for donors to the Colorado Railroad Museum and the Friends of the Cumbres Toltec Scenic. What better way to thank those who had generously contributed to help make this whole grand epic possible? This trip operated on a unique schedule, departing from Antonito at 2 p.m. on Friday, October 1st. The uncertain weather provided stunning blasts of sunlight, then drizzles and clouds on and off throughout the journey. The fall colors were some of the best to be seen in recent years. Some of the special guests aboard the train chose to experience the beautifully restored 19th century Rio Grande coach interiors. Indeed, they are beautiful. Most of the attendees also found time to make their way to the open-air gondola just ahead of Rio Grande Southern Caboose number 0500, where the viewing and picture-taking activity was at times intense. A photo stop at Cascade Trestle made for some great pictures. This was also a great time for rekindling old acquaintances and launching new friendships. Deep discussions along with friendly banter were enjoyed by all. A special catered supper at the railroad's new Cumbres Pavilion was another highlight. This first day concluded with a dramatic nighttime descent of Cumbres Pass, with the locomotive's firebox lighting up the night sky every time a shovel of coal was added. The next afternoon, the train departed again at 2 p.m., this time from Chama. Rio Grande Southern number 455, also known as Denver and Rio Grande 463, served as road locomotive, heading up the 4% grade out of Chama, with number 20 serving as helper. The two locomotives put on quite a show, which was in turn followed by lengthy caravans of railroad enthusiasts wielding cameras and tripods. At Cumbres, the special train met the regular train returning from Osier. The 455 was cut off to return to Chama, then the train backed into the Y. Those on board again enjoyed a delicious late lunch at the Cumbres Pavilion, which had again been decorated for the occasion by an enthusiastic crew. Then the train set out to make the complete return journey to Antonito over the rails of the former San Juan extension. Another photo stop was held along the way. Darkness had descended by the time the train approached the Antonito terminal. The experience of riding a period train at night was new for everyone. A great train crew, a beautiful consist, dazzling fall colors, and so much more combined to make this trip memorable for those who were fortunate enough to have been invited. The Colorado Railroad Museum sincerely hopes that there will be future opportunities to thank its supporters in similarly memorable fashion. Thanks for joining me today. The Colorado Railroad Museum is quite proud of the completed restoration of Rio Grande Southern Locomotive No. 20. The 10-wheeler's off-site journey allowed many more people to see this majestic locomotive in operation and benefited the museum with lots of free publicity and a generous measure of goodwill. The museum is committed to keeping the legacy of steam railroading in Colorado alive and delighted to work with the state's well-known railroad heritage organizations and generous donors to help continue making this possible. In 2021, two milestones were accomplished. The museum launched a fundraising initiative to support steam operations well into the future, and it celebrated having 3 steam locomotives in operation simultaneously for the first time ever since the museum's founding in 1959. I hope this special edition of Big Train Tours has whetted your appetite for 19th century railroading in the 21st century, and I also hope that your appreciation for Colorado's rich railroad heritage continues to grow with each and every tour of the museum's collections.
Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Commenting and sharing in particular may qualify as virtual engagements for important funding programs like the SCFD.